So the PTR for Phase 4 for Season of Discovery is launched, and with it we've gotten a lot of new information, specifically about class runes. New runes that are coming in Phase 4, old runes that are now removed from the game, old runes that have been revamped into new runes, and runes that have been made into a baseline ability through skill books. With all these changes comes a whole array of different class changes as a whole, of which we won't delve too much into, and instead for this video we'll focus mostly on the new runes, the revamped runes, and the runes that have been turned into baseline abilities. There is just so much information to talk about from the PTR right now to fit into one video, so don't forget to subscribe to see future videos on information about Phase 4 of Season of Discovery. There will be one new rune slot added into Phase 4 which will be on the cloak, with every class receiving 3 different new runes. There is also 2 new ring slots that can now house a utility rune each, but we'll cover those a bit later on in the video. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Druid, and the first cloak rune slot that we have is Improved Swipe. Now, I would imagine that most ferals are really happy about this one because I have heard so many times throughout Season of Discovery that feral druids just want some nice AoE and they really want a sort of improved swipe to deal more damage and to be able to swipe in cat form. So while in cat form, swipe nearby enemies inflicting 250% weapon damage and generating 1 combo point. And now while in bear form, swipe will now cause 100% increased additional damage and hit 3 additional targets. The second rune we have in the cloak slot for druids is Tree of Life. Shapeshift into a Tree of Life. While in this form, you increase healing received by 10% for all party members within 45 yards. Wild growth healing is increased by 60%, and your healing over time spells cost 20% less. You gain 25% increased spirit, you gain 200% increased armor, and you cannot cast harmful spells while in Tree of Life. I don't really know how big this is for resto druids, I just know that it looks fucking ugly. But hey, you druids, let me know down below if this is big for you guys or not. And the final slot we have for druids is Starfall. You summon a flurry of stars from the sky over 10 seconds, striking targets within 30 yards of your location, each dealing arcane damage to your target and subsequently less damage to every other enemy within 5 yards, maximum of 20 stars. So you boomkins are going to be absolutely loving this change because you're going to be getting some serious AoE with this ability. Okay, so moving on to the Hunter runes. First up we have Improved Volley, which reduces the mana cost of Volley by 50%, reduces its cooldown by 100%, and it no longer suffers from pushback from damaging attacks. Volley also deals 3% of your ranged attack power as additional damage each time it deals damage. The second rune we have for the Hunters is Resourcefulness. Reduces the mana cost of your traps by 100% and their cooldowns by 40%. And the final rune that we have is aimed at melee hunters, which is called Hit and Run. You gain 15% movement speed for 4 seconds after using Raptor Strike. Now I've got to be completely honest, when I first saw these 3 new runes for the hunter I wasn't overly impressed. But they do have quite a lot of changes to the runes they currently have. So first up we have Heart of the Lion, which is no longer a rune ability but now is a baseline ability from a spellbook. A new rune has been added in place of Heart of the Lion called Cobra Slayer. Your Mongoose Bite now activates when an enemy dodges your attack. A Mongoose Bite deals additional damage equal to 40% of your attack power. The Kill Command rune has been removed and replaced with a new rune, Kill Shot. You attempt to finish off a wounded target, firing a ranged attack dealing 100% weapon damage plus a standard amount. Kill Shot has no minimum range. Kill Shot's cooldown is reset if used on an enemy that has 20% or less health. When I first saw this, I was a bit sad that Kill Command was removed because I quite liked Kill Command, but I guess Kill Shot will be quite a nice execute to have for hunters and maybe really useful in PvP. The Invigoration rune has been removed and replaced with a new rune called Wyvern Strike. Your Wyvern Sting talent is replaced with Wyvern Strike, a stinging strike that deals 100% weapon damage and poisons the target with a sting for nature damage over 6 seconds. Only 1 sting per hunter can be active on a target at any given time with a 12-second cooldown. So moving on to the Mage, and the first new rune that we have is Arcane Barrage. Launches several missiles at the enemy causing arcane damage. This spell also has a 20% chance to trigger Missile Barrage. The second rune up for the Mage is called Overheat, and honestly when I first read this I thought this was pretty crazy, and I've got to be honest, it makes Fire Blast actually usable in a raid, and in PvP scenarios it's even better now. So Fire Blast will always deal a critical strike, can be cast while casting another spell, and is not affected by the global cooldown. So for example, in a raid in PvE raiding as a mage, Fire Blast has always been a bit of a filler spell. You use it when you're moving, you probably shove it out at the end of a cast if the boss is about to die, but outside of that, it's always been pretty useless to use. This actually makes it very good to use. The fact that you can cast it while casting and it doesn't affect the global cooldown. I mean, playing around with this rune right now on the PTR, this feels like a very fun and interactive way to actually use Fire Blast in your like PvE rotation. So honestly, I think this rune's really good. The third and final rune we have for the Mage is Frozen Orb. Launches an orb of swirling ice which rapidly moves forward over 16 seconds. While it is moving, every 1 second the orb deals frost damage and applies chill for 30% movement speed reduction to all enemies it passes through. It will also have a 100% chance to trigger the Fingers of Frost rune, so it actually has some really good synergy with Fingers of Frost. We're going to have to wait and see and give it a bit of testing to see if this is actually really broken or not. I know a lot of mages are actually hoping for this ability, so hopefully it's in a good state for you guys. The rune Advanced Warding previously has been lackluster and now it has been redesigned. It now also allows you to apply your Mage Armor Shield buffs to friendly targets, as well as cause your Remove Lesser Curse ability to also remove a harmful magic effect from your friendly target. So now this rune is actually insanely good for both PvE dungeon content, raiding content and PvP, because the mage now actually gets a magic dispel. Previously all they could do is decurse, but now they can decurse and magic dispel. This is actually a pretty good rune now, especially for a utility mage, PvP or a healer. Moving on to my main class, the Paladin. Now there is an absolute Bible worth of fucking information here about the Paladin. To be honest with you, there is going to be a completely separate video going over everything to do with Paladin, because there is just so much here to talk about. But we're just going to briefly touch on the new runes and some of the runes that have been revamped or made into baseline abilities right now. So the first rune we have is Shield of Righteousness, which slams the target with your shield, causing holy damage based on your block value for a 6-second cooldown. It's essentially just the warrior version of Shield Slam, a nice filler ability for Paladin tanks. The second rune we get for the Paladin is Vindicator. When your Vindication talent is triggered, it also decreases the target's attack power by 70 per talent point and increases your strength, agility and attack power by 5% per talent point. Vindication duration is increased to 30 seconds. Now to be honest with you, this rune is actually pretty good. The only problem I've got is that it competes directly with another rune and the third rune that they've released, which is Righteous Vengeance. When your Judgment, Crusader Strike, Divine Storm or Holy Shock abilities critically strike, your target would take 30% additional damage of that damage over 8 seconds, like a bleed ability, like Warrior Deep Wounds type thing. So you basically have the two runes that are really good and you want to take both. So maybe they will be situationally better in different scenarios. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe a tank actually takes Vindicator for the attack power debuff. It really depends whether it affects bosses properly or not. This is only a PTR, so we're not entirely sure. We'll have to wait and see how good these runes are. Additionally, other adjustments to the Paladin. Seal of Martyrdom is no longer a rune ability, but is now learned as a baseline ability from a skill book. A new rune has been added in place of Seal of Martyrdom called Divine Light, a powerful expensive heal that causes 50% of any excess healing from Divine Light to be converted into an Absorb Shield for 15 seconds. The Absorb Shield does not accumulate from multiple casts. Divine Light benefits from most talents and abilities that affect Holy Light. Exorcist is no longer a rune ability, but is now learned as a baseline ability from a skill book. A new rune has been added in place of Exorcist, called Aura Mastery. Doubles the magnitude of the Paladin's current aura for 6 seconds. Aura Mastery is not affected by the global cooldown. The Horn of Lordaeron rune has been removed and replaced with a new rune called Hallowed Ground. Your Consecration now heals party members within the area for 200% of the damage it deals to your enemies. The Enlightened Judgments rune has been removed and replaced with a new rune, Malleable Protection. You can now take actions during Divine Protection, and its duration is increased by 50%, but it only reduces the damage you take by 50% instead of granting full immunity. So what this rune is essentially doing is turning Divine Protection, which is the worst version of Bubble, into a shield wall version of it. Very similar to the Wrath of the Lich King version of like the Paladin shield wall. That's what this rune is going to be essentially turning that into. A new baseline ability has been added from a skill book, Avenging Wrath. Increases damage and healing done by 20% for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown, causes forbearance. Absolutely amazing that his Paladins are finally getting wings, and there is many more changes for the Paladin, and like I said, I'll be doing that in a completely separate video away from this. Moving on to the Priest, we have Binding Heal, a fast heal that heals a friendly target and the priest and deals a low amount of threat. This spell benefits from and triggers all effects associated with flash heal. The second rune we have is Soul Warden. Your Power Ward shield no longer has a cooldown, costs 15% less mana, gains 15% additional base value, and gains an additional 50% of your healing power. Lastly, the third rune that priests get is Vampiric Touch. A damage over time effect that grants 2% of the damage dealt as mana, returned to all party members. The Void Plague rune has been moved from the boot slot to the chest slot. Any Void Plague runes previously engraved on a chest or robe will disappear as faded rune and will need to be re-engraved with a different rune to gain a rune effect. I've got to be completely honest, there isn't much going on for Priest here. I feel like the Priest ones are a little bit underwhelming, but I will also say Priest has been one of the most benefited classes from Season of Discovery so far, especially the healers. Although I do feel a little bit sorry for the Shadow Priests because I feel like they could definitely get a little bit more love than what they're getting. They have struggled a little bit in PvE. Although at times they have shined in PvP, they definitely need some sort of boost in PvE just so they aren't always bottom of the meters like they pretty much always are in any iteration of WoW Classic in general. Moving on to the Rogue. The first new rune that we have is Blunderbuss. Fire a musket blast at enemies in a cone in front of the rogue, dealing physical damage. The second rune that rogues get is Crimson Tempest, a finishing move that slashes all enemies within 8 yards, causing victims to bleed over time, lasts longer and deals more damage per combo point. And lastly, rogues get the beloved Fan of Knives. Instantly throw both weapons at all targets within 8 yards, causing 105% weapon damage with daggers and 70% weapon damage with all other weapons. Now quickly before we just touch on the poisons for rogues, because there is some new poisons, I find it a little bit weird that rogues have been crying out for some AoE for so long. And now in phase 4 with a new slot, they've just gone and pretty much said, here you go, here's 3 new runes, they all do AoE, go and have fun. I think it would have been nice to have a little bit more variety here, not just 3 AoE options, and maybe something for Rogue Tank, because we know that they haven't done very well throughout Season of Discovery. And now let's quickly touch on the new poisons that rogues get. They get Sebaceous Poison, a poison effect that applies an armor debuff, roughly equivalent to Sunder Armor. Numbing Poison, a poison effect that applies a attack speed debuff, roughly equivalent to Thunderclap. Atrophic Poison, a poison effect that applies an attack power reduction, roughly equivalent to Demoralizing Shout. And finally, Occult Poison. Occult Poison behaves exactly the same as Deadly Poison, but also increases non-physical damage by 2% per application to a max of 10% bonus damage. Bit of a nice touch for rogues to give rogues some real utility into a raid, similar to Homunculi for priests, so people actually have a reason to bring a rogue for once, which is actually quite a nice touch. Next up we have the Shaman, and the first new rune that we have for Shaman is called Storm, Earth and Fire. Chain Lightning cooldown is reduced by 100%, Earthbind Totem immediately immobilizes targets when cast, and Flame Shock deals 60% increased periodic damage. The second new rune that Shamans get is Feral Spirit. Summons 2 Spirit Wolves under the command of the Shaman, lasting 45 seconds. The final new rune that Shamans get is called Coherence. Chain Heal effectiveness only reduced by 35% per jump, Chain Lightning effectiveness only reduced by 20% per jump, and each spell now jumps to 1 additional target. Shamanistic Rage is no longer a rune ability, but is now learned as a baseline ability from a skill book. A new rune has been added in place of Shamanistic Rage, Greater Ghost Wolf. Ghost Wolf is now usable indoors and reduces all damage taken by 10% while active. So overall there isn't a ton of new stuff for Shaman, but to be honest with you, Shaman was already in a pretty good spot in all aspects of play, so this should only enhance how good they are, especially that Storm, Earth and Fire rune. That seems kinda cracked, especially in PvP. The only one thing I would note about Shaman is that there has definitely been a lack of love for the two-handed Shaman playstyle, and there isn't anything here that really screams, we're gonna help, we're gonna fix it, which is a bit of a shame to see. But you know, it is only the first round of PTR testing. Hopefully there's gonna be more news coming out and more variables tested and changed going forward anyway. Next up we have Warlock, and for the first rune for the Warlock we have Decimation. Shadow Bolt, Shadow Cleave, Incinerate and Soul Fire damage on targets below 35% health, causes your next Soul Fire to not cost a Soul Shard and cast 1.5 seconds faster on a 10-second duration. The second rune that Warlocks will be getting is Mark of Chaos. After striking a target with Shadow Burn, your next single target non-periodic spell gains 100% increased critical strike chance. And lastly, we have Infernal Armor. Your spirit becomes infused with demonic energy, reducing all magic damage you take by a percentage equal to your physical damage reduction from armor. The effect lasts for 10 seconds on a 60-second cooldown. So essentially what this means is if you get 60% damage reduction from armor, this is a cooldown that will reduce your magic damage taken by 60% as well. Think of it a bit like an anti-magic shield from Death Knights. Moving on to the last class we have on the list, which is the Warrior. The first new rune they'll be getting is called Fresh Meat. Damaging a target with Bloodthirst has a 100% chance the first time and a 10% chance for each subsequent cast to enrage you, activating abilities which require being enraged, and causes you to deal 10% increased physical damage for 12 seconds. The second new rune that warriors will be getting is called Sudden Death. Your melee crits have a chance to activate sudden death for 10 seconds. While sudden death is active, you may use execute on any target, and you always have 10 rage remaining after using execute. And the last rune that warriors will be getting is Shockwave. Sends a wave of force in front of the warrior, causing damage and stunning all enemies within 10 yards of a frontal cone for 4 seconds. A new baseline ability has been added from a skill book, Meat Hook. Throw out a hooked chain to restrain the target and pull them towards you. Costs 15 rage, 30 yard range, and has a 35-second cooldown. This may not be used on enemies more than 1 level above the warrior, or which are marked as boss enemies. So basically it can't be used for pulling from range. Hey yo, I've got to admit, warriors have got some pretty nice runes this time round. Sudden death sounding like execute time all the time, and this new meat hook giving you even more gap closer. Now you have charge, intercept, and meat hook. You should definitely feel a lot better in PvP now with this new ability. There are also 2 brand new rune slots for the rings, branded as utility runes. These utility runes will consist of what was advertised to us at the very start of Season of Discovery, which is any class being able to use weapon skill. And don't worry if you don't use weapon skill because you're a caster, because you'll also be getting a spell hit variant of each spell skill that you have for your class. For example, as a Paladin, I can get two-hand axe specialization and holy specialization. And for any class that is a tank, you also get the capability to get defensive specialization, which increases your defense by plus 25, which is actually insanely good for classes such as Warrior and Paladin, who didn't get the 6% crit immunity from their runes. So we've covered all the new runes, all the major rework of runes, all the new abilities for class books, and all the runes that have been removed. There is so many more changes than what have been noted here, but there is way too much to go over in one video to be able to talk about every single class and every single change, every single rune change. So let me know what you guys think about the runes down below, and thanks for watching.